So welcome. Thank you all of you for joining us today for Beyond Academia, Strategies for Humanities and Social Science PhDs. My name is Alexandra Stephens, and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Career Programs and Engagement here at the Hiatt Career Center at Brandeis, and we're so excited that we get to offer these alumni webinars every single month and feature different alumni experts. Today's presenter is Joshua Cracraft, PhD class of 14 from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences here. Josh launched the website AllTechAdvisorcom with the belief that more resources were needed to help humanities and social science PhDs embark on meaningful careers outside of academia. He himself has successfully made that transition. Toward the end of graduate school, he served as the Director of Strategy and Operations at a nonprofit social science research organization, and for the past year he has worked as a program director at an education-focused nonprofit that promotes the humanities and global learning in K-12 schools. Previously, Josh had worked in publishing and helped develop career guides for first-time job seekers. He has a BA from Harvard in government and a PhD in American history from Brandeis. So we're so excited to have Josh here today. Before I hand over the reins, just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. The first is, if you have questions throughout the broadcast, please feel free to chat them in using the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. There is an accompanying PowerPoint, so if you're joining us on the phone and you can't see that now, we'll be sure to share it with you after the presentation via email. We also want to let you know that there will be some poll questions throughout the presentation. Now, these are completely anonymous, but we want to make it a little more interactive for you. So a question will pop up on your screen, and you'll just weigh in quickly, and then Josh will discuss the results with you. So there will be three along the presentation today. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and without further ado, Josh Cracraft.
Thanks a lot, Alexandra, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm really excited to be here. This is a subject that has become a passion of mine over the last few years since I embarked on my first alt-ac search. I actually like to joke that I've made 2 alt-ac searches and done so successfully. The first I did after my 6th year in the PhD program. I had known for a long time that academia, for a variety of reasons, was not the choice for me at the time, and so I was looking at different things, and I found an opportunity working on the business side of a nonprofit social science research organization in Cambridge, and I spent a year there, and it was a fantastic experience. I ultimately left to go back and do those revisions on the draft that I had promised myself that I would do. It was not working full-time was not conducive to finishing, which I found out quickly. So I wrapped that up, and then about a year and a half ago, I got a job at a place called Primary Source, and that's a nonprofit in the Boston area that does professional development for K-12 teachers. Basically, my role here is bridging that divide between what's going on in the ivory tower and what's happening in elementary, middle, and high school classrooms. So basically helping teachers teach more effectively. I am an alum of the AHIST program, or American History program at Brandeis. I had a fantastic time there. I know that in some alt-ac circles, there's some bitterness against academia. That is not personally how I feel. I always believed that academia was one of many possible pursuits that I could do after graduate school. I did launch this site called AllTechAdvisorcom between finishing the PhD and starting a Primary Source. I had a few months downtime, and I'd already been speaking on this subject quite a bit. And I decided, you know what, let's share this more broadly. And I specifically wanted to create a site for humanities and social science people, because I think their search and the perception of what humanities and social scientists can do is very different from people in the natural sciences, say. So I created this site drawing from my experience working a little bit in HR in the past, hiring people, interviewing people in both the publishing world and the nonprofit sector, including interviewing sometimes alt-ac PhDs and other people with advanced degrees who are in transition. The site's taken on a life of its own over the past year and now features articles from a number of different AllTech PhDs from a variety of disciplines who are doing truly amazing things. So I encourage you to take a look at it. I'm going to be giving, my talk today is a mix of some of the very basics as well as some more advanced stuff and things that are particularly relevant to PhD job seekers, because a job search with a PhD is going to be very different from a job search without one. We're going to do 5 things today before we get to the Q&A. I want to talk about AllTech basics, and what I mean by that is just kind of the frame of mind that you need to have before you get into the search. Like I said, it's going to be different from any search you may have done in the past or have heard about before. Talk about finding your path. That's both figuring out what you can do and figuring out what you want to do. There's some tips and tricks on how to do that. We're going to be talking about networking. Resumes, letters, and interviewing. Again, I'll go a little bit over some of the basics, but I really want to focus on the things that are different for people with PhDs. And lastly, before we get to Q&A, we're going to be talking about some things you can do right now to set yourself up for a great AllTech search if that is something you decide to do later on. So, Alexandra, if you could pop up the first poll question. I actually kind of want to get a sense of everyone in the room, where they come from and where they are in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. So our first question is, I'm participating in today's webinar because, and you can select one or more of the following. I'm worried I won't get an academic job. I wasn't offered a tenure-track job. I can't afford to adjunct for the next several years. Or I'm just not interested in academia. Or I'm just curious about the opportunities that are out there. And we'll give just a couple more seconds for you to weigh in. 3, 2, 1, and then we will close the poll here and share the results. So Josh, it looks like 45% worried they won't get an academic job, 18% just can't afford to adjunct, 45% overall just not interested, and about half curious about what you'll be chatting about today.
Great. This is it's a nice mix. I personally could not afford to adjunct even for 1 year after finishing PhD because of family obligations. You know, you got to pay bills. It looks like some people are worried they won't get an academic job. Others are just not interested in academia anymore. And I think that's reflective of how most people approach this. So let's dive in. Having trouble advancing my slides here.
So you could just click back on your presentation and then it'll go.
There we go. So the basics. Like I said, I want to talk about mindset a little bit here first before we dive into the nitty-gritty. First of all, it's really important to be patient. Job searches take time, and if you've never done one before, I know that's very frustrating, particularly if you are as impatient as I am. Job searches tend to take about 3 months at the minimum. That's because it takes time for an organization to put out a call for applications, to collect applications, to review them, to interview people, to do second rounds, to debrief, etc. I say that having been on the other side of the table, it just takes time. It could take up to 6 months if you have a PhD, because as we'll be talking about in a little bit, PhDs can, you know, raise some yellow, even red flags, and there are ways to get around that. But just knowing that that's going to be something that you have to work against sometimes just means that you need to calm down if things don't happen right away. But do be confident. You have a PhD that puts you in a very select group of highly educated and highly skilled people. And you know, keep in mind that the unemployment rate typically for highly educated people is much lower than the general public. So you will get a job. You will get a great job. It's just a matter of figuring out what you want to do and like I said, being patient. The third bullet point is really important, and this is something I think that's hard for a lot of people going out on their first AllTech search, is that you're really focusing on the next 2 to 3 years, not the rest of your life. Most people enter graduate school thinking they're going to become a professor and sit in the ivory tower forever, and that's really just not how most of the rest of the world works. Most people change careers, I think something like 7 times. That's not reflective of how many job changes happen. Most people bounce around, especially in this day and age. So again, you're thinking of the short term, you need to get a job. And once you have had a job after your PhD, it's going to be much easier to get subsequent jobs. Fourth, find a buddy. As with doing anything that's difficult, the more support you have, the better, whether that's your best friend who's also in grad school or a group in your school or your program of 10 people or whatever, but do it with a friend. And lastly, don't feel ashamed. There's a lot of guilt and shaming that PhD students do on themselves for not getting a tenure-track job or feeling like they're not competitive for a tenure-track job, and that's really unnecessary. I mean, I get where that's coming from, but the state of the field, academia, is changing radically, and there are going to be a lot of PhDs out there who don't have tenure-track jobs and who are not in the university system, but still doing really amazing things. And I think the more you can do to get over that feeling of shame, if you have that, the more successful you're going to be on your search. Second thing, before we get into the details, is always remember what the employer is thinking. Specifically, three things. Employers hire people to solve problems or make life easier. Most people stop after people. And really, it's employers have a specific need, and they're trying to meet it so that they can move on and or get better at what they're doing. Two, employers want to minimize risk when hiring. Hiring is a very expensive prospect. It takes a lot of time, as I said, at least 3 months usually. And there's no guarantee that the person that they hire or the people they hire are actually going to be a right fit for the job. So what they try to do is they try to look through the resume and the cover letters and assess in the interviews any flags or sticking points or whatever to make sure that the people that they do invite to work for them are actually going to be successful. And like I said, a PhD can be a flag. And so it's going to be incumbent upon you in your resume and your letters, and especially the interview, to ease those fears and help them see you as less of a risk. And finally, employers want smart people who can get things done. The underlined italicized part is always left off of people who are applying for jobs right out of school. Undergraduates in particular, but also PhD students fall prey to writing cover letters about how smart they are and talking about how smart they are in interviews. That's only one thing that an employer needs. Employers really need people who have a track record of successfully completing projects and assignments. So keep those three things in mind as we move forward. We'll be revisiting them again. So figuring out what you want to do when you don't necessarily know or think that it's not possible, since you're not going to be in the university system anymore, I think there's two ways to approach this. One, what can you do? And two, what do you want to do? There's definitely a perception outside of academia and within academia both, that when you do a PhD, especially in the humanities and social sciences, that you are becoming a subject matter expert. Say, for example, you write your dissertation on 16th century Italian cookbooks. Well, suddenly you are the world's expert on 16th century Italian cookbooks. That's true, you are. But what graduate school also does is it imparts on you a number of skills that are highly valued among all employers, regardless of whether they're academic employers or not. So let's look at those skills. I've put together a list of 15 skills that all PhDs across the humanities and social sciences have, and really all PhDs in any discipline. Take a look at this list quickly. All PhDs have the ability to make and deliver presentations, i.e. they can lecture. They can synthesize solutions, generate innovative ideas. That's the whole point of your dissertation research, is to do something that's never been done before. They can make sense of large amounts of information. That's your general exams, your lit review. They can analyze qualitative and, depending on the discipline, quantitative data. They can explain complex problems to non-experts. For example, 18-year-old first-year students who are straight out of high school, right? They can edit and critique written work. They can break down complex problems into smaller chunks. That's why your dissertation appears in chapters. They can collect data and information, write clear prose, communicate effectively with both undergraduates and other experts in the field. They can sell their ideas to others. That's the point of their dissertation, is coming up with an argument and supporting it with evidence. They can manage multi-year projects. Again, that's your dissertation. They can complete projects on time. Congratulations, you graduated. And then I put in parentheses within budget because, some of us go a little over that sometimes. And they can build relationships with like-minded professionals. In other words, you go to conferences. So like I said, these are skills that all PhD students have. And hopefully you'll be able to add to this list based on your research and your discipline and other things you've done in graduate school. And what you can do is once you've identified the skills you have, these skills and others, you can use this list as a lens to evaluate calls for applications and job descriptions. In other words, you can say, this is what I know I can do, and every time a job description comes across your desk, you say, well, do I have those skills? And you're looking roughly, usually for about an 80% match. Very few people who get hired have everything listed in the job description, but you want roughly 80% match. So that's how you can assess what you can do. But what about what you want to do? There are intrinsic motivators that give us satisfaction when we do work. And what you want to do is find a job or a career path that gives you satisfaction, however you define satisfaction. Some people call these job values. I personally like to call them motivators, excuse me. Mostly they're intangible things. For example, some people really derive a lot of satisfaction from working in a team. Others are the complete opposite. They like working alone. Some people like to synthesize and create and generate new things. And others are really about mastering a body of information or skills to a very high level. Some people like working with words. Some people like working with numbers. Some people need to be in a particular location. That was certainly me. I needed to be in the Boston area. Some people like thinking about the big picture more than they like thinking about details. Others are the exact opposite. This is a starter list. If you Google these things, you're going to find a much bigger list. But what you want to do is create a list, a short list of about 5 to, I would say, no more than 10 motivators that for your personal motivators. You want at least 5 so you have something to work with. No more than 10 because then you're really not being selective in what you're picking out. But once you get the motivators that really are important to you, then you can use those to evaluate job posts and calls for application in the same way that you did with your skills. You can say, well, okay, so I can do this job. I do have those skills, but do I want to do this job? Is it something that speaks to me? I'll give you a very quick example. When doing this exercise, I realized, and I could articulate, whereas before I could not, that I really personally felt that the work that I do needs to have greater meaning aside from just money. That's not how other people see work. It is how I see work. I mean, I do like money, of course. Who doesn't? But that's not what I think about when I'm in the middle of a project. I need to feel like it's having a bigger payoff. And once I realized that, I tended to look more in the nonprofit sector and the public sectors. Not to say you can't find work that has meaning outside of money in the private sector, but I knew I was going to have a much higher hit rate from my personal motivators in the nonprofit and public sector. So that's just an example. You want to find a job that aligns with most of the things on your list. Again, no job is really going to hit everything in your top 10 list, but the more you can get, the happier you're probably going to be at that job. So again, think about it in terms of skills and what you want to do. And then you're ready for the next step. You're ready to start meeting people. And I use this word, well, at least for a little bit, I'm going to use this word networking. But before we dive in, we're going to do poll question number 2. I really kind of want to get your thoughts on networking.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and launch our next poll. I love this one personally. What is your definition of networking? Networking is something I want to avoid if I can help it, something I know I need to do but dread, something I just love to do, or what's networking? So if you could just take a couple seconds to weigh in on the poll that's showing up on your screen. We'll hear a little bit from you and then share the results. And again, these are all in aggregate. So be honest. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results with Josh. So Josh, majority people know they need to do it but dread it, 57%. 30% love it. So props to you folks. 7% say something I want to avoid if I can help it, and 7% were honest and they're like, what really is networking?
Great. Yeah, when I started out, even though I had worked on career guides a long time ago when I worked in publishing, and I knew how this worked, I knew what networking was, I really did not want to do it, and I dreaded it, and I wanted to do anything but network. I thought, oh, I can just apply cold to jobs, and you can get jobs that way, but for a variety of reasons you don't want to, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But that's interesting that 30% love to do it. That's kind of where I am now. You really should be networking all the time. And once you start doing it and you learn how to do it, you'll do more of it, and it won't be a chore anymore, and it's something that you really look forward to even. So let's dive in. This is how the dictionary defines networking. For those of you who said, what's networking, or curious to know what the actual definition is, this is Merriam-Webster's: the exchange of information or services among individuals, groups, institutions, specifically the cultivation of productive relationships for employment or business. That word cultivation, it's like you're growing something, right? I think a lot of people would tend to think you're growing something negative. They associate networking with the word schmoozing, or using other people to get ahead or to get what you want. That is not what networking is, but that's how almost everyone defines it. And so I tend not to use the word networking at all. Instead, I just call it getting coffee. As everyone at Primary Source, where I work now, can attest to, I love coffee, both for its the caffeine and for the taste. And I love every chance I can get to grab coffee with someone, work permitting. So the nice thing about getting coffee is it's such a harmless thing to do, where two people can meet, whether they're old friends or new friends, or they're just getting acquainted, and grab a cup of coffee in a safe environment and chat for a little bit. Networking in this sense, obviously you're going to be wanting to talk about professional things. One person is probably going to be new to the industry. That's going to be the AllTech PhD usually, and the other person's going to be the veteran, even if it's just by a couple of years. But it's a nice atmosphere. It takes away the dirty connotations of networking. And the point is, when you network, you just want to establish a genuine connection with another person. So yeah, you are talking about your professional interests, but it's really more about two people getting to know each other. And I think if you can think of networking or getting coffee as that, you're going to be a lot less. You're going to be less apprehensive about it and a lot better at doing it. So how do you build your professional network? In other words, who are you getting coffee with? A great place to start is your academic colleagues. So that's both your professors, who, as I can attest to, having worked at two nonprofits that work with academics, they're highly, highly connected people. They know a lot of people who are very smart, doing high-level stuff outside of academia, and you really want to start there. Also think about your classmates or colleagues, fellow PhD students. You want to do alumni networks. That's both people who've done PhDs in your programs before. If you did your master's degree elsewhere, plumb that, and particularly your college networks. Facebook, family, your personal connections. There are a lot of interesting people doing interesting things out there. And if anything seems interesting, even if you don't think that you have any chance of doing it, by all means, go get coffee with that person. That's the whole reason you're doing this, right? You're going to find things that surprise you. Sometimes you're going to think that the obvious things that you could do are not interesting to you, and things that you thought you could never do in a million years but were interested in, you actually can do. LinkedIn. I included this one because a lot of academics don't know much about it. LinkedIn is like Facebook for working people. Instead of personal friends, it is more about professional connections, although it's usually your network starts with your personal friends. The great thing about LinkedIn, though, is that you can see everyone's connections in a way that Facebook doesn't allow you to see. So, for example, assuming you've already filled out a profile and established some connections on LinkedIn, say you come across a job opening at Google, and you're really interested in working at Google because you've heard amazing things like that cafeteria, amazing, right? And you decide that you want to learn more about it, but you don't know anyone who works at Google. What you can do is you can go sign into LinkedIn, and in the search bar, type in Google, and it's going to tell you a little bit more about the company, but it's also going to make apparent any people in your professional network up to 3 degrees of separation who work at Google or who worked at Google. Therefore, you can connect with somebody at Google through a mutual friend, for example, and you just reach out to your friend and say, hey, I heard about this opportunity. I kind of want to learn more about the company before I apply. Could you introduce me to your friend who worked at Google? I've made a lot of connections that way and gotten a lot of informational interviews that way. It's a free tool, and you're crazy not to use it. Bottom line, when building your professional network, tell everyone you're on the AllTech market. I think most people are going to assume that because you are doing a PhD that you're interested in becoming an academic, you don't have to hit everyone over the head with the fact that you're not interested in that anymore, but just let everyone know that you're open to new ideas and new opportunities, and that'll make possibilities happen and opportunities happen. So how do you make new connections? I said you can get coffee with old friends or new friends or people that you just met, maybe through LinkedIn. You shoot them a quick, short email. This is an example of an email I actually sent to someone that I went to college with but didn't know personally. He was doing some really interesting work for a branch of an industry that I was interested in and knew really nothing about. And when I came across him in the alumni directory, I thought it'd be crazy not to, ask him if he'd like to get coffee. I apologize up front for the cold email. I told him exactly how I found his name. I'm not stalking you. This was in the public directory, or not the public directory, but the alumni directory. And I said, I recognize that you're really busy, and I know this is asking a lot of you, but I was wondering if we could get coffee. You know what? He answered back in 24 hours. And I would say I typically, when I send this email out, it's just the same email, different, updated with particular information or information particular to different individuals. I send this email out, you usually get an answer in 2 to 3 days at the latest. It's very flattering if you're receiving an email like this. Think about it in terms of an undergraduate emailing you saying, I'm really fascinated by this subject that you're teaching, and I'm interested in pursuing a PhD. Now, you might have a lot to say to them, pro or con, but it is flattering. Someone wants to do what you're doing. It's always great to get that information that what you're doing is awesome, right? I would say about 70 or 80% of the emails like this that I send out, I get answers, yes, I'd love to get coffee, let's get coffee soon. When people don't answer, it could be because they're not interested, but it's more often than not just because they don't have time. I've gotten responses back 3 months after the fact because people said, I was slammed with projects and I'm sorry, but I'm just getting back on my feet and I'd still love to get coffee if you have the time. Sometimes these conversations can lead to interviews, but more often than not, they're going to help you figure out what you're interested in and what you're not. And it's going to put you on other people's radar, which is really important later on. The do's and don'ts of networking and informational interviewing. An informational interview is an interview that you set up with someone in the working world as opposed to you applying for a job and them asking to interview you. You don't ever ask for a job, even if you know one is open. Just don't do it. It's going to shut everyone down and make them not interested in talking with you anymore. Never ask anyone specific salary information. You can talk ranges, but don't ask the person you're having coffee with, hey, how much money do you make? That's just really rude. Do ask about their day-to-day. Do ask what skills are important for the industry, or if you're talking about a particular job, about that. And also important, ask what they like, why they like what they're doing. Those last 2 bullet points, again, go back to the skills and the motivators that are going to help you assess if that's something that you're interested in doing, whether it's at that company or at another company in the field. So resumes, letters, and interviews, you're building your network, you've figured out your skills, you've figured out what you want to do, or some general ideas of what you want to do. How do you actually apply for jobs? This leads us to poll question number 3. I'm kind of curious to hear about your work experience and how many of you have worked full-time jobs outside of academia already.
So this is the last of our polls today to get you being a little interactive on this online chat. So how much full-time work experience do you have apart from school? So did you have 1 or more full-time jobs between college and graduate school? Did you have a full-time job during graduate school? Or did you go straight from undergrad to grad, never having worked full-time? So I'll just give you a couple more seconds to weigh in, and then we will share the results. So Josh, it looks like 60% have had 1 or more full-time jobs, 13% had a full-time job during school, and 27% went straight from undergrad to grad, which of course we see a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I would say this is pretty typical breakdown as far as I know. I don't know exact numbers, but just anecdotally, people I encountered in PhD program at Brandeis, this is reflective of that. For those of you who have worked before, that's going to give you a leg up in terms of being able to prove, yeah, I can get stuff done. I'm not just really, really smart. You're also probably going to have a little bit more confidence. But for those of you who went straight from college to grad school and have never worked full time, don't worry. That's actually not a problem. And we're going to talk about how you can sell your graduate school experiences, which really are professional and work experiences, again, to minimize the perception of risk among employers. So I'm going to talk resumes, cover letters, and interviews in that order. I am going to go through some of the basics of each, but I'm going to spend more time about or on the PhD-specific stuff. So resumes, just to keep in mind, they are not rosters of jobs. They are meant to tell a story. They're meant to tell a single story, communicate a single message to a particular employer. They're selective. They're curated. You don't put everything you've ever done on a resume like a CV. They're kind of like your greatest hits list in your professional life. They're always customized to a specific job. You are never going to send out 2 resumes that are identical. If you are doing that, you need to stop right away, because it means that you're not taking enough time to look at the job description and to tailor the message that you're communicating in your resume to that particular employer for that particular job. The last bullet point, when I do this talk live, always elicits chuckles. I say resumes are works of art, and this is having come from looking at a couple thousand resumes. There's a big difference between the resumes that look good and are visually appealing and are easy to read, and ones that aren't. This doesn't mean you need graphics or photos or colors. Please don't put those on your resumes, but they do need to be they need to be beautiful, because people are reading these very quickly, and the more visually appealing they are, the more information is going to jump out to the reader. Which leads me to, what makes a great resume? Well, you want them to be able to be read quickly. It's no joke that when people are reading resumes, they usually only have seconds to make a decision of, this is going to get looked at for longer or not. I'm going to have to put this in the other pile. That's just reflective of how little time most people have in the working world. It's not because they're not interested in you or getting to know every single person. It's just reflective of no time. So the more you can do to front and center the important information, again, that message that you're communicating to a particular employer, the more likely it is that your resume is going to get looked at longer, which will make it more likely that you get the interview. You want to contextualize key info. Unless you've only worked for blue chip companies before, you're going to want to explain what the smaller companies that you worked for do and what your role there was. That's really important. Use bullets. This is really big. Bullets make information easier to read than prose. You want to use bullets to do 3 things. You want to highlight responsibilities, highlight value added, and highlight significant projects. In other words, talk about what you owned at the place of employment. Talk about your babies, your significant projects, what were your brainchilds, and then talk about value added. And that's the one that I think a lot of people, PhD or otherwise, fail to do in their resumes, is that they don't talk about how they improved the company or made life better for everyone at their previous jobs. Remember what I said, employers they hire people to solve problems and to make life easier. And if you can show that you added value by bringing in, doing more sales than expected, or creating new initiatives, or making a process more efficient than it was before. If you can show that on your resume for previous work experiences, well, that communicates to the employer, to the prospective employer, that you didn't just show up for work. You actually worked hard, and you made life better for everyone else and improved the company. And that's really going to make your resume stand out and make it more likely that you move on to the next step. Use action verbs. Those are all Googleable. Quantify as much information as possible. There's a big difference when reading a resume, an entry that says, I supervised 50 student research projects as a grad student versus I supervised research projects. It's a difference in scale. And finally, your resume should be 1 to 2 pages. Again, it is not a CV. Do not submit more than that. Even if it says CV on there, do not submit more than 1 to 2 pages. So where do you put your PhD on your resume? Well, it definitely goes in the education section near or next to where you went to college and if you did a master's degree elsewhere. It goes in the professional experience section too. This is going to be particularly important for those of you who went straight from undergrad to graduate school. Your PhD is your education, but it's also your professional life. You're spending 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe more years as a PhD student. You want to talk about your teaching. That's leadership experience. You want to talk about your research. Those are projects that you owned. This is, you know, a significant. It's your entire, for those of you who went straight through, it's your entire portion of your professional life so far. And even if you did work a year or two before college or during graduate school, depending on the job you're applying for, again, it's all about what message are you trying to communicate to a particular employer. If you think the particular employer is going to be interested in something you have to say about your teaching experience, which is, again, leadership experience, or research experience, which, again, is project management experience, that's something every company needs, then you know, I strongly advise you putting your at least some of these things in the professional experience section of your resume. And finally, any technical skills you picked up along the way, language, computer, sometimes quantitative skills, put those in the skills section too. So let's talk about cover letters. It's easier to talk about what cover letters should not do first and then talk about what they should do. So first thing, they should not be essays. This is something that PhD students are very guilty of. We are in the business of writing essays, right, and explaining our thoughts in narrative prose form, most of us. And so it's hard to write a very short letter when we think we have to do a lot of explaining about something, about why a job is awesome or why you're awesome or whatever. Keep it very short. A cover letter should not narrate your resume. This is the #1 mistake that I think all people make, PhD or otherwise. They don't really know what to put in the cover letter, so they end up rehashing everything that's in bullet form on their resume into prose form in their letter. That's just boring, and it's a waste of time and a missed opportunity for applicants. PhD students are also very guilty of bullet point 4. Do not wax lyrical about your research, your awards, how awesome you are, how smart you are. PhD students are, fall prey to this for 2 reasons. One, this is what we're accustomed to doing when we fill out grant applications. And 2, we spend so much time in a system that rewards talking about all the accolades you've ever received. And to be quite honest, most employers are really not going to be interested in your research. They'll be interested in seeing that you've done it and how you did it, the methodology, the process of how you did it, but they really don't care about, what was it, 16th century Italian cookbooks or whatever I said earlier. The last point, don't use the letter to explain why you aren't pursuing academia. It goes back to that feeling of shame or that need to have a cathartic moment where you're getting it all off your chest to explain to someone, to confess why you're not becoming a professor. The cover letter is not the opportunity to do that. We will talk about when you do that. That's later on, but don't do it in the cover letter. Cover letters should always be addressed to real people. There are no ifs, ands, or buts to that. Even if you address it to the wrong person in the company, the fact that you addressed it to a real person in the company says you did your homework. Have a thesis statement about why you're applying. You should say, I think I'm an excellent candidate for this position because of my experience in XYZ and my ability to, brackets, solve your problems, essentially. You want to name drop your connections, and this is where networking can really pay off. So remember, employers want to minimize risk. What's one big way to minimize risk? Well, it's to hire somebody you know or feel that you're connected to in somehow, right? So if you have previously had an informational interview or got coffee with someone who works at the company or who used to work at the company or is somehow connected to the company, being able to name drop that connection up front, and you want to do it at the very top of your letter in the first or second sentence, will mean that your resume gets looked at. If for no other reason than the person reading the resumes doesn't want to be rude to the connection. Bullet point 4, you want to highlight reasons why you fit the job description. This is all about helping the company solve its problems, right? The company is going to tell you, I use that term loosely, it's a nonprofit, government agency, whatever, the organization hiring. is going to tell you what their problems are in the job description. There's nothing secret about this. They're telling you right up front, this is what we need help with. And what a lot of people fail to do in their cover letters is say, look, I see you have problems doing XYZ. I actually have experience doing XYZ. Here, let me help you. I can help you. I've got those abilities. If you do that, if you name drop your connections, if you have a brief thesis statement about why you're applying, and you highlight the reasons how and why you can help them solve their problems, well, that's going to whet the reader's appetite. And that's really all the cover letter has to do, is to get them to flip the page and look at your resume. So they liked your cover letter, they liked your resume, they invited you for an interview. This is not an informational interview. This is an actual first-round job interview, and hopefully that leads to second rounds. How do you approach interviews? Some very basic stuff here. You treat it as a dress rehearsal. In other words, it's never perfect. You can always get better. Always, always, always get better. It's like writing. You walk into an interview with the goal of getting another interview. If you walk into it with the goal of getting a job, you're going to put a lot of stress on yourself, make yourself very nervous, and the reality is you're going to have at least 2 interviews, and sometimes each round you're going to be meeting with lots of people. So just set yourself some realistic expectations of trying to get to the next level. Always do your homework and always practice. That's just going to make you a better applicant and a more confident applicant. There will be questions that only PhDs get asked, or there will be questions you get asked that only PhDs get asked. Why did you do a PhD? Why didn't you do academia? Why would you ever write a dissertation on Italian cookbooks in the Renaissance? Why are you biding your time until you get a tenure-track job? And wouldn't you be bored here? These are real questions. I've been asked every single one of these, save the last question, which has been heavily implied in a lot of interviews. You're going to need to have these answered in your head before you walk in the door for the interview, and preferably before you even apply. So how do you answer those? Well, the very first thing is you want to own your PhD. You should never try to hide it. You should be proud of it. It's an opportunity that most people don't have. And think about it this way. Any place that hires you that isn't interested in your PhD isn't really going to be valuing you as a person or as a skilled professional. The other thing on that point is, it's the 21st century, folks. Everything can be found online, so people will know, and you don't want to start by lying up front. Be positive. Don't ever trash talk academia, the university system, the tenure track nonsense, your advisor, anything like that. It only makes you look bad. You want to craft a narrative that puts the position or the employer at the next stage of your professional development. So yeah, I did do a PhD. I was really interested in Italian cookbooks in the 16th century, but I gained a lot of very valuable skills along the way, skills that can help me help you. And that's bullet points 4 and 5. Always focus on skills, not the content, because that's what the employers are 99 times out of 100 are interested in, are those skills. And always connect or explain how your skills can help the employer solve her problems. So before we get to Q&A, I want to talk about some things you can do right now to set yourself up well for an all-tech search if that's something that you decide to do. First thing, start networking. It's like exercising. You're going to see the benefits right away. It doesn't matter how far along you are in the process or if you're just starting out. When you go on these informational interviews and you send these cold emails to people, and even you meet with old friends and you talk about professional things, you're going to get more confident talking about yourself in your academic experiences and your skills and what interests you and what doesn't interest you, and you're going to get that confidence, and you're going to meet a lot of people, and you're going to grow your network so that by the time you do look for all-tech opportunities, you're going to be enmeshed in a thriving network already that's, I should say, a robust network with lots of opportunities. Find a part-time job. This is a little bit of a strange one, but you do want to find a part-time job if you're not working full-time already, and you want to find a job that is more than just showing up. You want to find a job that will give you some space to take on some real responsibility, even if it's just for a few hours a week. I say that for 2 reasons. One, you want to be able to show that you've had some recent work experience, particularly if you have only had part-time jobs in the past or you worked many, many years ago before starting grad school, and especially so if you have never had a full-time job between college and grad school. You're going to want to be able to show to an employer, yeah, I'm really smart, but I can also get things done. The other reason why you want to get a part-time job is because you're going to need somebody to go to bat for you when you do apply for all-tech jobs, for the full-time ones, who can say, again, this person's really smart, but can get things done. This person also helped me solve my problems, made life better for me. That's something that your academic advisor is not really going to be able to say. She's going to be able to say how smart you are, the great work you did, what a complex project it was, etc. But she's not really going to be able to say from an employer's perspective, this person really helped and really came through and is just a great asset to the organization. Know what you have to offer. That's doing your homework on what skills do you have, what are your motivators. The earlier you can do that, the better off you'll be. Write a resume and get feedback. Like any writing task, you're going to be pretty terrible at writing resumes when you start. I look back at my resumes when I started my AllTech search and I laugh, and that's having written books on how to write resumes. It's a different task. Each industry, each field has their own, I wouldn't say style, but they look for different things. They look for different keywords. They look for different experiences and accomplishments. And you want to get as much feedback as possible from people who know how to write resumes, as well as people who work in particular fields to see what stands out and how you can make yours better. And finally, apply to select jobs, particularly if you are close to finishing. You might find your dream job, but more likely you're going to build that confidence and experience in writing successful letters and writing successful resumes and going on successful job interviews, so that by the time you are ready to get an full-time AllTech job afterwards, you've got a leg up and you're much more comfortable with that. So that wraps up my portion of the talk. I'm really curious to hear what you have to say. There's one final thing I wanted to add before we get to the Q&A, is that everything I've shared with you today does not reflect anything of any of my or any opinions or ways of doing things of employers that I've had past or present. Those are my own views, just based on a lot of work I've done in this area and hearing what a lot of other AllTech people have done to get some really great jobs. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Josh. We do have some questions coming in. So the first is this listener is going from a 22-year career in a certain field and is getting his master's in something related to that field, but would position him for a different job altogether. How do you recommend someone go about that type of search and that type of career move? You referenced transferable skills and things like that already.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have changed careers completely a couple times already, and the way I do it when I go on interviews, and whether they're informational or job interviews, is it's really all about the narrative that you craft. And what the way I do it is I communicate an aha moment, kind of. So I'll say I was doing this and I was getting all these skills, and they're very valuable skills and applicable in a lot of ways, but I suddenly had an experience, a particular experience, and I will briefly describe in 30 seconds or something like that a profound moment that made me think, hey, maybe I should go do something else or take my career in this direction, even though I never thought about it before. And I think if you can tie it into, like I said, an aha moment or whatever it was that sparked your interest or that convinced you or encouraged you to look in a different direction, it's going to be an easy sell, because it's going to be a genuine story about why you did what you did. I would keep, or why you're trying to do what you're trying to do. I would keep it focused on skills. Again, those 3 points, employers are trying to minimize risk, and employers want to hire smart people who can get things done, and employers are looking to solve problems. And so always do, tie it back into your skills. I kind of do here's what I was doing, the skills I acquired, had an aha moment, and I thought, hey, I could do this because those skills that I picked up and these new skills that I picked up could really, and they really helped me do what I wanted. And that's kind of what you're doing, and people see that transition.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is, what are some ways to search for AllTech jobs? So have you come across any specific job boards or other resources that you found to be very helpful when you're actually searching for opportunities?
So yes and no. That's a terrible answer. Let's start with the yes first. So after I figured out what my personal motivators were, and I knew that I was more interested, at least for now, thinking in the few years span, not the rest of my lifespan. I thought, I think a good place for me to be, where I would be happiest, would be in the nonprofit sector. And where do nonprofit jobs get posted? Most of them get posted on idealist.org. That's idealist.org. And that's nonprofits across the country, some public sector stuff, where what's not being said is you're not going to make a lot of money at these jobs. You're going to be fine and comfortable, but you're not going to grow wealth or anything like that. But you are going to find work that has meaning outside of the work itself, or outside of making money. I found, I think, both of my AllTech jobs initially on idealist.org. There's another one, Indeed.com. I think that's in terms of quantitative measurements, the largest job search site. That's a mix of everybody, private, nonprofit, public. The way you use these, though, so do spend time looking to see what's out there. It's a great way of thinking about your skills and your motivators and how they fit into what's out there. You're going to learn more what's out there and how jobs are described and what you have to offer, et cetera. But the way you use these job search sites, and this is where the no comes in, is I strongly encourage you to look at these sites with the idea that you are using them to get information, not to find opportunities that are open, or not necessarily to find opportunities that are open. Look for organizations that are really interesting to you, whether they're doing interesting work or a particular team or project or whatever. And then go through your network and find somebody who works there. Go on that informational interview. Even if there's a specific job opening, that's a strategy that I think the best job searchers take, is like, oh, wow, there's an opening at this company. The example I used earlier was Google, right? There's a particular opening. I don't know anyone at Google, but I would kind of like to talk to somebody there before I actually submit a cold application where I can't name drop any connections. And you go have coffee with somebody. I also approached it as, what have I done in the past that I've really enjoyed doing? What are some projects in academia or otherwise that I've derived a lot of satisfaction from, that blended my motivators and my skills? And I extrapolated on my own, what are some industries that might be appealing? And then you go to the job board sites and you say, well, what are the companies in those industries? Again, just kind of gathering information as opposed to trying to find job openings and submitting applications blind.
Yeah, I think, Josh, in addition to that, what you were talking about before regarding LinkedIn, how excellent the company pages are, and that it lists all of the employees on LinkedIn from that company. It's a great way to glean potential job titles, see what skills and education they have in their own profiles. Regardless of whether you're connected to them or not, you can still view their profiles and do your career research that way.
Right. One last thing, you can always Google these things. So a lot of industries have their own job boards, which you won't know unless you know them, if that makes any sense. An example would be if you're interested in teaching in independent schools in New England, there is an umbrella organization called ASNE. I forget what the acronym stands for, but that's where all jobs in independent schools in New England are posted, whether you're talking about a parochial school or like Exeter. And jobs go up at a particular time of year, and you go to that website. And the way you find that website is just Google independent jobs, independent school teaching jobs New England, and that website's going to come up, and then you're going to be able to see their job board. You can do that with teaching. You can do that with pretty much any industry out there. The other thing to do is the more you talk to people, the more you're going to find out about other opportunities. It's one of those. It's like interest; it compounds, right? You're going to learn, if you go on an informational interview, you're going to learn more about that person you're meeting with and the company that she works for and the field that she's in. But if you listen carefully, you're also going to hear other things that she's saying too, probably about related industries or sister or brother organizations. And each interview grows your network exponentially.
Great. Thanks, Josh. I think we have time for just one more question here in the minutes we have remaining. This listener has heard mixed reviews about pursuing a postdoc. Some in alternative academic jobs that she's spoken with thought it was a good opportunity to get a more diverse set of skills, while others thought a postdoc was essentially a waste of time and just a postponement of getting a better job. What are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts are minimal. I have not done a postdoc. I didn't apply for postdocs. I didn't think about it personally very much because I knew that I never went on the academic, so it wasn't for me where I was in my life at that point. Anecdotally, I know people who've done postdocs, like 2-year gigs, and have transitioned out of academia and have really amazing jobs that blend their academic experiences and other professional experiences that they've had. I know postdocs who were frustrated because they were hoping for a tenure-track job after the postdoc, and that didn't happen. Again, I think it really goes back to the narrative that you craft when you're out in your informational interviews and job interviews of, do your homework ahead of time and think about how that postdoc is fit into your trajectory, your career trajectory. Even if it's one of those situations where things didn't happen the way you thought they would happen, that's life. That happens to everyone, whether they're in academia or not. And, be honest and talk about how each academic experience has led you to the next step, whether the next step is in academia or not, and you'll be just fine.
Josh, any last final words before we close out today and just talk about a few next steps?
I would just say that I think the AllTech world is exciting. There are lots of things that you can do related to your actual dissertation or your graduate degree or not. That doesn't mean that academia isn't for some, but it isn't for a lot of people, and they find that out along the way, or it isn't a reality. And I think, the way we define academia is changing so that there are a lot of people out there who don't work for universities who still publish for academic presses and in academic journals, and you can still do all the things that you were trained to do and more, and have a very meaningful, rewarding career, however you define meaningful and rewarding. So good luck.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Josh. This was wonderful and a really great way to start thinking about what's next for folks. If you could just advance to the next slide for me. I wanted to share with you all to please fill out our satisfaction survey and let us know how we did. We host webinars every single month, open to the full Brandeis community. Our next one is in January, and it is on goal setting and accountability in the new year, which may be a very good follow-up to this one. We also encourage you to join us in the Brandeis University Career Connections group on LinkedIn, as well as to remember, if you are a graduate of the Brandeis undergraduate program here, that the Hiatt Career Center does offer free career services for life to you. So certainly something to remember. And with that, I wanted to also share our contact information here. So if you could advance just to the final slide. Here's my contact information. Please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions or comments on today's webinar. Again, thank you so much to Josh Cracraft and to the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences for introducing us and making it possible for him to participate as today's expert presenter. So again, thank you all for attending today's webinar. We hope to see you online for a future program. And have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Alexandra. Best of luck, everyone.